Today, we're breaking down a topic that is especially interesting to me: how churches spend their money. And the reason I find this topic so compelling is that traditionally, this is something that we've known very little about, which is pretty remarkable when you consider that close to a third of all charitable giving in the US goes to churches. So in this video, we're gonna explore one of the most comprehensive, nationally representative studies of church finances that we have available. And by the end of this video, you're gonna have a much clearer understanding of how the average church allocates their funds. So let's dive in. Well, hey there, I'm Brady Shearer. This is Pro Church Tools, and we're here to help you and your church navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. Consider subscribing if you're new, and if you enjoy this topic of video, give it a thumbs up to show your support. It really is one of the best ways to give back on YouTube. I'll also welcome you to connect with me beyond YouTube on both Instagram and TikTok, where I'm posting my most timely content throughout the week. Now, I want to begin here by citing our sources. The study I'll be referencing throughout this video is the National Study of Congregations' Economic Practices, NSCEP for short. If you're curious about the team behind the study, you can go to their website directly, nscep.org/team. You'll see the authors, the research team, the advisory board, and the endorsers of the study. We'll have that linked in the description, of course. Published in 2019, over 1,200 US churches participated in the study, and like I said earlier, it is nationally representative. And what that means is that from location to tradition, age, ethnicity, budget size, congregation size, this study uses the same makeup of churches as what you would see nationwide. The caveat, of course, is that this study is American-based, but as this kind of data is rare, hey, this Canadian will take it. Okay, let's get to the fun stuff. The numbers. According to the study, in 2017, US churches received collectively $124.52 billion in donations, which accounts for 29% of all charitable giving in the States. Now, how does that get distributed to individual churches? Well, when it comes to budget size, 28% of churches are working with a budget of $100,000 each year or less. 33% of churches have an annual budget between $100,000 and $250,000. 17% of churches are in the $250,000 to $500,000 range, 13% in the $500,000 to $1 million range, and 9% with a yearly budget of greater than $1 million. As for the median congregational revenue, that sits at $169,000. So that's what churches are working with when it comes to their budgets. Now to the juicy stuff, how that money gets spent. Not surprisingly, the biggest chunk goes to personnel. This is wages and or salary for the pastors and people that work for the church, makes up 49% of the budget. So about half to personnel. The second biggest line item in the budget is facilities. 23% of the budget goes to that. This will comprise the rent or the mortgage, along with the utility bills that accompany that facility, also building maintenance and construction. Now, I don't know about you, but this does not come to any surprise to me, because I was always under the working assumption that the vast majority of a church's budget, on average, goes to facilities and personnel. And this is the data now that confirms that hunch. Altogether, about 3/4 of the entire church budget goes to cover facility and personnel. So what about the remainder, the final 28%? Well, this is where the categories become much smaller. We've got dues at around 6%, programming at 10%, and missions at 11%. Now, dues are straightforward. We'll get to programming in a moment, but I should clarify, for the missions portion of the budget, that includes service projects and general benevolence as well. And when you look at it through that lens, it makes sense. Basically, this is showing that churches donate about 10% of their budget to efforts beyond their own members and programs. As for the aforementioned programming budget, about 10% for the average church, how does that program budget get broken up within itself? Well, again, perhaps not surprisingly, the biggest chunk is portioned off for worship at 35%. We've got 23% for kids programming, 21% for events, 14% for adults, and 7% for other. So, a few observations I want to make in response to this data. Firstly, recently I published a video about talking about giving in churches, and the big idea of that video was that churches often use their mission efforts, service projects, and benevolence as talking points when calling the congregation to give. And my issue with that, and if you want to see the full video, which is more nuanced than this summary, it's linked above me and in the description. But my issue with this practice is that it's a bit unseemly to use benevolence as the prop to motivate giving when it makes up such a small slice of the actual budget. That kind of framing comes with the risk of sowing distrust amongst your givers. And now that we know that just about 1/10 of the average church budget goes towards mission, service, and benevolence, to me, that becomes even more important and something to be aware of as a church communicator. Second observation, we need to come to terms with the fact that churches spend the vast majority of their budgets on personnel and facilities. I mean, again, if you've worked in churches, you've probably seen this before in how your own church allocates their funds. Exceptions, of course, exist. So this may not be groundbreaking news, but we now have a nationally representative study that confirms this is normal operating procedure in churches. We pay our pastors, we erect our buildings, and there isn't too much left over after that. Now, let me be clear. I'm not suggesting that structure is wrong or that this kind of budget is immoral per se, but I think what we do need to strive for is greater diversity amongst how we do church. A couple of years ago, we published a video called The New Rules for Church Buildings, linked above and in the description. And the thesis of that video was similar. We need more expressions of church. You know, the moniker, church done different. Maybe you've heard it before, it gets thrown around. It usually just means louder music and a more accessible message. But realistically, most churches are carbon copies of one another. And that's not motivated by theology, it's motivated by culture. Western church culture, what's expected and what's acceptable. And more than anything else, those principles are expressed by the church's budget. Said differently, if someone asked you, hey, you go to church, you serve in church, like, why does the church exist? Your answer might contain phrases like making disciples, spreading the gospel, helping the poor and the needy, equipping the saints. However you answer that question, the follow-up question must be, okay, is the best way to accomplish that objective by spending 3 out of every $4 given to you on personnel and facilities? And look, I really don't mean to berate churches or ministries here, but I get frustrated when I look across the landscape of church and I see one expression, one model, 99 times out of 100. We desperately need more expressions of faith communities, especially because it's not like you can look at what we're doing right now and say, hey, it's working exceptionally well. You know, there are so many factors that go into this, but church attendance has been steadily declining for more than a decade. The same goes for those that identify as practicing Christians. If there were ever a time to begin expanding and experimenting, it's now. But it all goes back to that budget. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And I get it. You know, you serve in a church, you watch this channel, I'm talking a lot about colossal changes. You've still got responsibilities to take care of this week. So what can we do in every one of our churches to take concrete steps forward in how we steward our finances? For most of us, it's probably unrealistic for our budgets to invert in the next 12 months. You know, the bank probably won't take too kind to that when the mortgage is due. So what can we work towards? Let's say over the next year. Well, let's go back to the initial number from our study. In 2017, US churches received about $125 billion in donations when we round up for all American churches, and with the median church revenue sitting at $169,000. And the number I want you to keep in your mind is 1%. It might not sound like a lot, but for the median church, that's $1,690 in a year. It's close to $20,000 over the next decade. And collectively, for churches, it accounts for $1.25 billion every year. Now, what does that 1% figure represent? It represents at minimum the amount that most church giving companies keep for themselves when a digital gift is processed. It happens behind the scenes. It's not a transparent extraction because that 1% gets lumped in with the transaction fee that takes place anytime a digital transaction happens. Let's say a processing fee is 2%. A church giving company will charge your church 3%, and they'll pocket that extra 1% for themselves. In the industry, we call this rev share. It's wildly profitable for giving companies to participate in, which is why it's the current standard in the world of church giving. So, one tangible step that we can all take in being better stewards of our finances is to not use a giving company that participates in rev share. I mean, just imagine if that kind of pricing model existed elsewhere. You want to start using ProPresenter or Easy Worship in your church, and the folks there say, sure, the amount you receive in digital gifts this year, we'll charge you that. Just 1% of all that, give us that. Then you can use ProPresenter. That would be a non-starter, but it's the standard in church giving, just something we accept. because our options are few and far between. So we set out to build something new. It's called Nucleus Giving. It has the lowest processing fee in the industry because we never keep any of your church's donations for ourselves, which again, is really not that high of a bar, but here we are. Bottom line, your church will never lose any of your giving to fees, and to date, in the first 2.5 years-ish of operation, we've given back millions of dollars to churches that would have been lost to fees, that other companies would have kept for themselves. Instead, that money stays with the church where it belongs. You can see it for yourself at nucleus.church/giving, explore what the cost savings would look like for your church individually, and get started on our platform for free. And look, irrespective of what giving platform you use, be aware of rev share that's happening. How much are you and your church losing to fees? If your giving company charges you $0 per month as your flat rate, they're able to do that because the fees you're paying more than cover it. Here's a church that did the research into their budget and discovered they paid more than $3,400 in processing fees the year prior. And this is happening in virtually every single church. Let's exchange that experience for something like this. A gift comes into your church and it all goes to you. When it's a big gift, like in this case, $5,000, it's that much more obvious, but little gifts are what add up over time, and you end up losing the same amount to fees either way. Of course, I'm more than happy to talk about the giving industry inside the church world whenever you want. Most of what happens behind the scenes, we're trying to set a new standard of transparency. Most of what happens behind the scenes you don't hear about. We want to be upfront with churches. Nucleus.church/giving. Check it out. And thanks as always for your time, attention, and trust. We'll talk soon.